The metallic tang of rust was a constant companion here, clinging to the air, to my clothes, even to the back of my tongue. It was a taste that had replaced the acrid smoke I'd lived with for so long. Every morning, I woke to the same muted light filtering through the grimy, reinforced glass of my window, a square of weak yellow against the dull gray concrete. My room was a cell, self-imposed, within what used to be a sprawling textile factory, now partitioned into countless identical units. The quiet was profound, broken only by the distant, rhythmic hum of unseen machinery, a sound that burrowed into my skull and echoed the emptiness within me. I traced the cold, smooth surface of the drafting table with a fingertip, a ghost of a blueprint under my touch. My hands, once precise and confident, now trembled with an almost imperceptible tremor. It had been years since I'd truly designed anything, not since the fire. The memory was a splinter buried deep, festering. I saw the flames licking at the windows, the frantic, useless struggle against the heat, the smoke, and then the silence, a silence far more deafening than any scream. I had designed that house. Every beam, every wall, every intricate curve of the staircase. It was supposed to be a sanctuary, a testament to our life together. Instead, it became a pyre. My sanctuary, my design, their grave. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making each breath a conscious effort. They were gone. My beloved, my children, snuffed out. And I, the architect of their home, was left to wander this desolate landscape of my own making. What right did I have to even exist, to feel the sun, to breathe this stale, metallic air? Sometimes, in the dead of night, I swore I could still smell the smoke, the burning wood, the sweet, cloying scent of something deeper, something lost. My routines were rigid, a desperate attempt to impose order on a life that had fractured beyond repair. A few hours of meaningless sketching, a sparse meal, and then the long, solitary walk. Today, the fog was particularly thick. It swallowed the sparse trees that dotted the perimeter and muffled the already distant hum of the world beyond these walls. I pushed open the heavy steel door that led outside, the creak echoing in the heavy air. It was real. It was a sensation I could still register. I walked out into the recreation yard in thick fog, watchtower invisible. The watchtower, usually a stark silhouette against the sky, was completely consumed by the swirling gray. It was unsettling, this sudden blindness, this erasure of boundaries. I couldn't see the fence, couldn't see the limits of my confinement. It felt as if I could walk forever into the mist, and perhaps that was the point, to lose oneself completely. The ground beneath my worn boots was damp, a fine sheen of moisture clinging to everything. Each step I took seemed to absorb the sound, leaving only the faint, rhythmic crunch of gravel and the ragged sound of my own breathing. The air was heavy, tasting of damp earth and something else, something metallic and faintly bitter like old blood. There were no other figures out here. There rarely were. The few others who resided in this repurposed industrial complex kept to themselves, ghosts haunting their own private ruins. I stopped near a bench, its wooden slats slick with condensation. What was the point of a recreation yard if no one recreated? If there was no joy, no laughter, only the quiet procession of the broken? He carried a briefcase, a stark anomaly in this desolate place. He moved with an unnerving purpose, heading directly towards me. My heart gave a dull thud against my ribs. Visitors were rare, almost unheard of. I hadn't seen anyone from the outside world in months, not since the last of the legal proceedings had concluded, leaving me stripped bare of everything but my name and my guilt. Who could this be? What fresh hell could possibly await me? He stopped a respectful distance away, his face obscured by the fog and the brim of his hat, but I could feel his gaze, a prickling sensation on my skin. He didn't offer a greeting, merely extended a gloved hand holding a thick, cream-colored envelope. It felt heavy, substantial. Raj. His voice was smooth, cultured, entirely out of place here. I represent the estate of the late Roll, a distant relative, but I cannot name them, so I will refer to them as the deceased's representative or the legal representative to avoid naming convention's violation. The paper felt thick, expensive. My name was inscribed on the front in elegant, looping script. A strange tremor ran through me, a premonition of something unsettling. I hadn't thought I had any family left, not really. Not anyone who would even remember my existence, let alone leave me anything. The late Roll, the deceased's representative, passed away last week, he continued, his voice devoid of emotion. And much to our surprise, I have been named the sole beneficiary of their estate, including the ancestral home. The words hung in the damp air, heavy and unexpected. An ancestral home. I knew nothing of such a place. My family, my immediate family, had been rooted in the city, modern and detached from any such legacy. The idea of an ancestral home felt like something from a forgotten story, a relic from a past I didn't share. My fingers tightened around the envelope, crinkling the expensive paper. What forgotten branch of my lineage had suddenly remembered my existence? And why now, after all this time, after everything? What secrets might this unexpected inheritance hold within its forgotten walls? An ancestral home. The words had resonated with a hollow clang in the lawyer's opulent office, a sound that seemed to echo not through the room but through some cavernous space within me. I had sat there numb, the polished mahogany desk between us a vast, unbridgeable chasm. My family, the one I knew, the one I had lost, had been urban creatures, rooted in steel and glass, not in forgotten dirt. This inheritance felt like a cruel joke, another twisted consequence of a life already splintered. It's quite a substantial estate, Raj. The lawyer had continued, oblivious to the storm brewing behind my eyes. Been in my mother's line for generations, untouched mostly since my great-aunt's passing a decade ago. Untouched. The word conjured images of dust motes dancing in forgotten sunbeams, of silence so profound it hummed. The city, with its incessant hum and its too familiar streets, had become a mausoleum of memories, each corner a fresh stab of grief. Perhaps an untouched place, a blank canvas of decay, was exactly what I needed. A place where my own guilt wouldn't have 1,000 echoes. A fresh start, or at least a different kind of ending. I packed light, a single duffel bag holding essentials, a roll of architectural plans I couldn't bear to discard, and the persistent ache in my chest. The drive was long, the landscape slowly shedding the familiar concrete skin of civilization for something wilder, greener, then ultimately just older. The road narrowed, asphalt giving way to gravel, then eventually to a dirt track swallowed by overgrown hedges. The air grew cooler, carrying the damp scent of ancient earth and decaying leaves. And then I saw it. It wasn't a house. It was a monolith. It was larger than anything I had imagined, a testament to a forgotten grandeur, now merely a monument to neglect. This wasn't a fresh start. This was a confrontation. The front door, a heavy slab of oak studded with rusted iron, groaned open with a sound like a dying beast. Dust motes, disturbed by my entry, danced in the weak shafts of light filtering through grimy panes. My architect's eye immediately assessed the damage. Sagging floors, water stains blooming across ceilings like grotesque fungi, wallpaper peeling in leprous strips. But beneath the decay, I could discern the original design, the bones of a structure built with purpose and a certain, almost defiant, elegance. I spent the first hour simply walking, my footsteps echoing in the vast, empty rooms. The silence was not peaceful, it was watchful. Every floorboard groan, every distant drip, every gust of wind rattling a loose pane felt amplified, scrutinized. I chose a room on the ground floor near the back, overlooking what I assumed was once a garden, now a riot of thorny bushes and skeletal trees. It was smaller, less imposing, and had a fireplace, though the chimney was clearly blocked. I cleared a patch of floor, unrolled my sleeping bag, and set out the few items I'd brought: a battery lamp, a thermos of coffee, a book I wouldn't read. As dusk deepened, painting the sky in bruised purples and grays, the house began to settle around me. Or perhaps I began to settle into it. The wind outside picked up, a mournful lament through unseen cracks. I was unpacking my small bag when I heard it, a faint scraping sound originating from somewhere above, It wasn't the wind nor the house settling. It was too rhythmic, too deliberate. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Like something being dragged across bare floorboards. I froze, my hand still gripping the zipper of my duffel, my breath hitched in my throat. "Just the house," I muttered aloud, the sound of my own voice startlingly loud in the quiet. Old houses make noises. I forced myself to continue unpacking, deliberately slow, deliberately loud. The scraping stopped. Nothing. Just the distant moan of the wind and the rapid thrum of my own pulse. A false calm settled. A pocket of frigid air seemed to coalesce behind me, raising goosebumps on my arms. I turned but saw nothing out of the ordinary, just the lamp's glow on the peeling wallpaper. Then, the floorboards above me groaned again, not a settling creak but a heavy, deliberate thud. It was directly above, louder this time, followed by another and another. Slow, measured footsteps. Moving, my heart hammered against my ribs. I snatched the lamp, its beam a weak spear against the encroaching gloom, and peered up at the ceiling. The sounds continued, moving away from directly above me towards the front of the house. I could almost visualize the heavy, unseen tread. Suddenly, a vivid image flashed into my mind, sharp and disorienting. I was standing in a vast, open expanse, the ground beneath my feet coarse gravel. A thick, milky fog enveloped everything, pressing in from all sides, suffocating. I could taste the damp, metallic tang of it on my tongue. The air was heavy, silent, save for the muffled drip of moisture from an unseen height. I strained my eyes, trying to pierce the swirling gray, searching for an edge, a boundary. But there was nothing, only the endless, featureless expanse of the recreation yard in thick fog, watchtower invisible. A profound sense of isolation, of being utterly alone in a place designed for observation, washed over me. My chest tightened. Then just as quickly the vision dissolved, leaving me standing in the dusty room, the lamp trembling in my hand. The footsteps upstairs had ceased. It wasn't just the house settling. It wasn't just the wind. I ate a cold sandwich, the stale bread doing little to settle the gnawing emptiness in my stomach. The scraping hadn't returned. I told myself it was the wind, a branch against the glass, the settling of ancient timbers. An old house, especially one this neglected, made all sorts of noises. My mind, I decided, was playing tricks, still reeling from the shock of the inheritance, the weight of the past. It had been years, but the images of the fire, the acrid smoke, the searing heat, they still clawed at the edges of my vision when I let my guard down. This house, I convinced myself, was merely stirring up old ghosts, not harboring new ones. The next few days were a blur of forced normalcy. I worked on my laptop, trying to sketch out ideas for a new project, a public library design that felt impossibly mundane compared to the oppressive grandeur of my surroundings. I unpacked more boxes, filling the musty shelves with books I'd carried from my old life, their spines a comforting splash of color against the faded wallpaper. Each evening, I prepared simple meals, the clatter of pots and pans echoing through the vast, empty kitchen. I even started to clear some of the overgrown brush from the periphery of the property, the physical exertion, a welcome distraction from the quiet hum of the house. But the quiet wasn't always just quiet. Once, I swore I heard a child's faint giggle drift from the floor above, a sound so delicate it felt like a shard of ice in my chest. I froze, my hand on the banister, listening, straining, but it vanished as quickly as it came, leaving only the creak of the old house and the frantic beat of my own heart. I told myself it was imagination, a trick of the acoustics in these vast, empty rooms. Grief, I knew, could conjure powerful illusions. Then the object started to move. It began subtly. My reading glasses, left on the bedside table, would appear on the mantelpiece downstairs. A specific architectural drawing laid out carefully on my drafting table would be folded and placed back in its portfolio. I'd blame myself, my own forgetfulness, the distraction of the house, the sheer exhaustion. I'd retrace my steps, convinced I was simply misremembering. But the occurrences grew more frequent, more deliberate. I started leaving small, specific items in unusual places, testing my theory. A single, tarnished silver spoon balanced on the edge of the fireplace hearth. A worn leather-bound book propped open, face down on a high shelf. The next morning the spoon was gone, only to reappear later that afternoon, perfectly centered on my pillow. The book was closed, its cover facing outward on the kitchen counter, several rooms away. My breath hitched. My hands started to tremble. This wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't the house settling. This was something else. My rational mind, the architect who dealt in blueprints and structural integrity, struggled to reconcile this new reality. There was eye-cracking. There was the isolation, the guilt, finally eroding my sanity. From the living room window, I could barely see past the weeping willow, its branches dissolving into the white haze. I wrapped myself in a heavy blanket, trying to focus on a book, but the words blurred. The house felt like a maw silently consuming the light. I walked to the rear of the property, drawn by an inexplicable pull. Visibility was reduced to mere feet. I stumbled through the overgrown grass, my shoes soaking instantly, the dampness clinging to my trousers. The air tasted metallic like old pennies, and then through the swirling vapor it coalesced, a vast circular expanse of cracked concrete, bordered by a rusted chain-link fence. This was the recreation yard in thick fog, watchtower invisible. The fence itself was barely discernible, a skeletal outline against the white. I knew there was a watchtower somewhere beyond the yard, a detail I'd seen on old maps of the property, but the fog had completely devoured it. All I could perceive was the vast, empty circle, the phantom echo of forgotten activity. I took another step forward, closer to the fence, and through the wisps of fog I saw it, a faint impression on the concrete like a stain. It wasn't recent, it was old, almost faded, but undeniably there. The child's handprint, the possessive scrawl. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. An old caretaker's child, a trespasser, but the feeling radiating from that spot was not of innocent play. It felt ancient, heavy, demanding. I backed away slowly, my eyes fixed on the concrete, on that word. The fog seemed to press in closer, blurring the edges of my vision, making the world feel claustrophobic. I needed to get back inside, away from this place, away from this feeling. But as I turned, my foot snagged on something buried in the overgrown grass near the fence. I stumbled, catching myself, and looked down. Half hidden in the damp earth, a small wooden doll lay face up. Its eyes were painted wide and black, and its mouth was a permanent, unsettling grin. It was old, weathered, and clutched in its tiny, wooden hands was a miniature, tarnished silver spoon. The same spoon. The one that had appeared on my pillow, my breath caught in my throat. This wasn't a trick of my mind. This was a deliberate message. The doll's painted eyes seemed to stare directly into mine, its grin mocking my attempts at rationalization. What was this thing, and what did it want from me? That small, smudged handprint on the wall, the one that felt so old and heavy, pulsed in my mind long after I'd stepped away. It wasn't a trick of the light, not dust, not a stain. It was there undeniably, and the chill it left in its wake was not of the house's drafty bones, it was something else. My architect's brain, usually so quick to rationalize, found itself struggling. A logical explanation. I needed one. Desperately. I returned to the spot, a flashlight clutched in my hand, its beam cutting a stark circle through the dim corridor. I ran my fingers over the faded wallpaper, tracing the outline of the tiny hand. It was rough, almost imprinted into the surface as if pressed with immense force. My initial thought was a child, perhaps from a previous family, playing a mischievous game. But the sheer age of the house, the way the print seemed to hum with a silent energy, dismissed such an innocent notion. This wasn't chalk or paint. It felt absorbed. I began my meticulous investigation, starting right there. My determination, a stubborn refusal to surrender to the creeping unease, took hold. If this house held secrets, I would uncover them brick by brick, beam by beam. I pulled out my measuring tape, my small level, and a notebook. I tapped the wall around the print, listening for any hollow sounds. Solid. Too solid. My gaze drifted from the handprint to the surrounding architecture. The corridor was long, connecting the main living area to a series of smaller, unused rooms. The ceiling was high, adorned with crumbling plasterwork that spoke of forgotten grandeur. The floorboards groaned under my weight, each step a protest against my intrusion. I examined the baseboards, the door frames, the corners where the walls met. Everything seemed original, undisturbed for decades. But as I moved further down the hall, my flashlight beam sweeping across the walls, I noticed something peculiar. A faint seam, almost imperceptible, ran vertically down a section of the wall, partially obscured by a heavy, ornate tapestry depicting a hunting scene. I'd walked past it a dozen times, dismissing it as a decorative element or a patch job. Now, with my architect's eye sharpened by suspicion, it looked different. Too straight, too deliberate. I carefully peeled back the edge of the tapestry. The air behind it was still, heavy with the scent of dust and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet like old blood. The seam was clearer now, a hairline fracture in the plaster extending from floor to ceiling. It wasn't a crack, it was a joint, a hidden door. My breath hitched. My heart started to beat a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This wasn't a structural flaw, it was intentional. I ran my fingers along the seam, feeling for any latch or handle, nothing obvious. I pressed, pushed, pulled, trying to find a weak point. The wall remained steadfast. Why would someone conceal a door here? What was behind it? I inserted the tip into the seam near the floor, applying gentle pressure. The wall shifted. Slowly, with a low groan that sounded like a sigh of ancient wood, a section of the wall began to swing inward. I hesitated, my hand still on the edge of the now open panel. Every instinct screamed at me to close it, to walk away, to pretend I hadn't found it. But the handprint, the unsettling atmosphere of the house, my own gnawing guilt, they all pushed me forward. I had to know. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the passage. The air was thick, heavy, pressing in on me. The metallic scent was stronger here, almost overwhelming. The passage was short, perhaps 10 feet long, ending abruptly at another, heavier wooden door. This one was bolted from the outside with a massive, rusted iron lock. It was meant to keep something in, or keep people out. My flashlight beam moved over the door, then down to the floor. The ground was packed earth, damp and yielding. And then I saw it. Faint impressions in the mud, small like the handprint but more numerous. A child's footprints partially obscured, leading right up to the heavy door, and then abruptly they stopped. They didn't lead away. A sudden jarring image flashed in my mind, unbidden and vivid. A vast open space shrouded in a dense, swirling fog that swallowed all light and sound. The ground was barren, churned earth marked with countless chaotic tracks. And in the distance, barely visible through the swirling mist, was the silhouette of a tall structure, a tower, its upper half completely lost to the atmospheric haze. A watchtower, I realized, its purpose ominous and unclear. The recreation yard in thick fog, watchtower invisible. The words formed in my head, sharp and clear, though I had no memory of ever seeing such a place. It felt like a memory, yet it wasn't mine. It felt like a warning. I shivered, shaking off the sudden vision. My gaze snapped back to the footprints. They didn't leave. They simply ended at the door, as if the child had vanished into thin air. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the vision with the immediate discovery. What connection could there be? And what was behind that locked door? A residue, perhaps, of a fear so profound it had etched itself into the very plaster. The weight of it settled in my chest, a cold, dense lump that refused to dissipate. I couldn't just leave it. I couldn't pretend it wasn't real. My initial determination, that stubborn refusal to be broken by grief, now felt like a fragile shield against an unseen adversary. I needed answers. I needed to understand what history this house held, what tragedies had seeped into its foundations. My search led me to the dusty, forgotten study on the second floor. The air in here was thick, tasting of old paper and the metallic tang of something long gone, like rust on an ancient blade. Shelves crammed with leather-bound volumes lined the walls, their spines cracked and faded. A grand mahogany desk dominated the room, its surface scarred with generations of use. Beneath a pile of brittle architectural plans, surprisingly, Some of my own ancestors' early drafts for additions to this very house. I found them. A stack of journals, their covers varying from simple leather to more ornate, embossed designs, spanning what looked like centuries. Each one was a testament to the lives lived and lost within these walls. I pulled the oldest one first, its pages yellowed and fragile, the ink a faded sepia. The script was elegant but difficult to decipher, an archaic hand that spoke of a different era. I spent hours hunched over the desk, the only sound the rustle of turning pages and the frantic beat of my own pulse. The entries were initially mundane, chronicling daily life, harvests, births, but as I moved through the years, a subtle shift occurred. References to the blight or the pall began to appear, vague at first, then more frequent. Then came the losses. A child taken by a sudden fever, a spouse succumbing to an unnameable wasting sickness. Financial ruin described in stark, desperate terms. What struck me was the language of sorrow. It wasn't just sadness, it was a profound, almost spiritual despair. And I feel as though it is not enough. The house demands more. The house demands more. That phrase coiled around my thoughts like a viper. I flipped to another journal, a later one from the early 1900s. The story was different in specifics but identical in its emotional arc. Initial happiness, then a slow, insidious creep of misfortune. A beloved sibling lost at sea, a business venture collapsing, a betrayal by a trusted friend. And always the escalating language of grief and self-reproach. My sorrow is a bottomless well, another entry stated, and yet I feel it is not deep enough. It is never deep enough. There is a hunger here that my tears cannot sate. My breath caught in my throat. I looked at my own hands, trembling slightly as they clutched the old journal. My own sorrow, my own guilt. The gaping maw of loss that had swallowed my family, my wife, my children. The architect of their demise, the one who had designed their ill-fated sanctuary. The grief that had been my constant companion since the fire, a parasitic weight I could never shed. It wasn't just the house's age or the weather. I felt it then, a horrifying clarity. This house didn't just witness suffering, it cultivated it. It didn't just contain grief, it consumed it. The entity, whatever it was a scavenger of despair, a parasite that fed on the profound, soul-crushing sorrow and guilt of its inhabitants. And I, Raj, with my own monumental burden of loss, my own architecture of regret, was a feast laid bare. A low, guttural moan seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, a sound too deep to be human, too ancient to be an echo. It vibrated through the floorboards, up through my chair, into my very bones. My skin prickled. My vision blurred at the edges, the faded script on the page swimming before my eyes. I pushed myself away from the desk, the journals scattering across the floor. I stumbled backward, my chair scraping loudly. I had to get out. I had to get away from the suffocating presence that suddenly felt so tangible, so close. My lungs burned for fresh air, for any air that wasn't thick with the stench of ancient grief and the metallic tang of a predator's breath. I burst from the study, not knowing where I was going, only that I needed to be away. Down the grand staircase I flew, my feet thudding against the worn treads, the house groaning around me as if in protest or perhaps satisfaction. I fumbled with the heavy front door, its ancient lock refusing to yield. Desperation surged. The world outside was a swirling, opaque canvas. I found myself in the recreation yard in thick fog, watchtower invisible. The fog was not just mist. It was a living, breathing entity, coiling around me, damp and heavy, muffling all sound. The air tasted of damp earth and something else, something cloying and sweet like decaying flowers. I could barely see my outstretched hand. The watchtower, a crumbling stone structure I knew stood somewhere at the edge of the property, was swallowed whole. I was alone, adrift in a sea of white, but I wasn't alone. I felt it. A presence shifting within the dense vapor, drawing closer. I could hear nothing but the rush of blood in my ears and the frantic, shallow gasps of my own breath. What was moving in the fog? My breath hitched, a jagged intake of stale air. I stared at my hands, the grip tight where they gripped the brittle pages of the journal. My own sorrow, my own guilt. The gaping maw of loss that had swallowed my family whole, my wife, my children. The words on the page clawed at me, not just with their meaning, but with the raw, desperate terror they invoked. This house. It wasn't just haunted. It was a predator, a patient, ancient thing that fed on the very despair I had brought with me. A cold dread, unlike any I'd felt before, settled deep in my bones. This place had drawn me in not to offer solace, but to consume me. To consume my grief, my self-reproach, the gnawing ache that had been my constant companion since the fire. A wave of nausea rolled over me, my stomach clenching. I couldn't stay. Not one more second. I scrambled to my feet, the old chair scraping harshly against the floorboards. My legs felt heavy, as if weighted with lead, but a desperate urgency propelled me forward. Escape. That was the only thought, a frantic drumbeat against the inside of my skull. The main hall loomed vast and echoing. My footsteps, usually muffled by the thick rugs, now sounded unnervingly loud, sharp cracks on the polished wood. The air grew heavy, thick, pressing in on my chest. I could feel it, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, as if the house itself had taken a deep, slow breath. The grand oak door, the one I'd entered through, was my target. I reached it, my hand fumbling for the ornate brass handle. I twisted. Nothing. It wouldn't budge. I pulled, gritting my teeth, putting my full weight into it. The door remained steadfast, an unyielding barrier. I tried another door, a smaller one leading to what I remembered as a service entrance. Locked. Then a window, hoping for a simpler egress. The sash was painted shut, fused to the frame by decades of neglect. This wasn't right. These doors had been accessible before, hadn't they? I spun around, my eyes scanning the dim corridor, nothing visible. I tried another door, one I hadn't noticed before, tucked away in an alcove near the main staircase. It looked like a simple utility door, unpainted, almost crude against the stately wallpaper. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, I shoved it. It swung open silently, revealing not a pantry or a storage closet, but a narrow, unlit passage. Hope, fragile and fleeting, flared within me. This had to be an escape route, a forgotten exit. I stumbled forward, my outstretched hands brushing against rough stone walls. The passage twisted, then opened abruptly into a wider space. A blast of frigid, damp air hit me, stealing my breath. I blinked, my eyes struggling to adjust. I was outside, but not in the overgrown gardens I remembered. This was a vast, open area, the ground beneath my feet a coarse, uneven gravel, thick fog and opaque, swirling curtain of gray, pressed in from all sides, swallowing the distant boundaries. I could taste the moisture in the air, a metallic tang on my tongue. The very air felt different here, heavy and silent, as if sound itself was being absorbed by the dense mist. I could barely see my own hands in front of my face. The oppressive silence was broken only by the ragged sound of my own breathing, each exhalation a cloud in the frigid air. Where was the gate? I knew there was a high, wire fence around this yard, topped with barbed wire and a gate. I remembered seeing it on the old blueprints. I started to move, blindly pushing through the swirling gray, my feet crunching on the gravel. Every step felt like wading through thick mud. The fog twisted and writhed around me, taking on vague, indistinct shapes at the periphery of my vision, fleeting impressions of towering forms, only to dissolve into mist when I tried to focus. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum. I could feel the hairs on my arms prickle, a primal warning system screaming at me. Then a sound, a deep, resonant clang like heavy metal striking heavy metal. It came from somewhere ahead, swallowed almost immediately by the fog, but clear enough to make me stop dead. The gate. It sounded like the gate had just slammed shut, but there was no wind, no visible force, just that definitive final sound. The fog seemed to thicken, to coalesce, becoming almost solid, pushing in from all sides, trapping me in a shrinking bubble of visibility. I felt a profound sense of despair, a crushing realization that this wasn't just a house, it was a cage. I was utterly alone, adrift in this shifting, suffocating mist. How could I fight something that held the very air I breathed in its suffocating grasp? My own sorrow, my own guilt, the architect of their demise, the one who had. the words on the page blurred. Architect of their demise. Not of the fire, not directly, but the architect of the conditions for it. The house, my design. The ancestral home, this place, its very stones humming with something hungry. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. The journal detailed generations of offerings, of sustenance, of pacts. Not sacrifices of flesh, not directly, but sacrifices of peace, of conscience, of joy. The family line, my bloodline, feeding an insatiable presence with its own misery. I pushed back from the desk, the old wooden chair scraping a protest against the floorboards. The room, once a sanctuary of old books and quiet history, now felt like a cage. The air grew heavy, thick with something I couldn't name, something that pressed against my eardrums. A low hum vibrated through the soles of my feet. It was the house, breathing. The walls around me seemed to ripple, the aged wallpaper shifting, its patterns twisting into grotesque faces that dissolved as quickly as they formed. The antique clock on the mantelpiece began to chime, not the gentle hourly strike, but a frantic, discordant cascade of bells, each one a hammer blow against my skull. I clutched my head, the sound agonizing. Then silence. The kind that felt louder than any noise. When I lowered my hands, the room was gone. My shoes, the same ones I'd been wearing moments before, were slick with moisture. The air around me was a swirling, opaque curtain, thick fog. It clung to me, beaded on my eyelashes, muffled all sound. How could I be here? One moment the library, the journal. The next, this desolate, open space. I took a tentative step, my footfall a dull thud swallowed by the mist. I spun slowly, trying to get my bearings, but there were none. Just the endless, featureless white-gray. The world had shrunk to a few feet around me. A faint clanking sound reached me, distant, rhythmic. It was like chains dragging or metal on metal. It echoed, not from a specific direction, but all around, a pervasive, unsettling resonance. I froze, every muscle tensed, close. Right beside my ear, it spoke of avarice, of betrayal, of secrets buried deep beneath the earth, my ancestors, my blood. The names, though indistinct, felt familiar, heavy with a weight I hadn't known I carried. My family hadn't just built wealth, they had fed it. Not with honest labor, but with the slow, agonizing sacrifice of their own souls. Each act of cruelty, each deceit, each hidden transgression fueled something that now lived in the house, something that thrived on the bitter, curdled milk of guilt. The fog thinned momentarily directly in front of me, just for an instant, enough to reveal a faint, almost imperceptible etching on the concrete, a symbol, and beneath it a name, not mine, but a name from the journal. An ancestor known for his ruthlessness, his sudden, inexplicable prosperity, his equally sudden, inexplicable despair and disappearance. The fog closed in again, thicker than before, swallowing the symbol, swallowing the name. But the image was seared into my mind. This wasn't just a haunting. This was a legacy, a pact. And I, Raj, the last architect, the last link in the chain, was the culmination, the grand design. The journal had spoken of a final offering, not a death, but a complete consumption, a merging. The entity didn't want my life, it wanted my grief. My overwhelming guilt for the fire, for my family's deaths, for my perceived failures. It was a feast prepared precisely for it. I was not just a victim, I was the chosen sacrifice, the ultimate meal. I had sought solace, a fresh start. Instead, I had stumbled into a trap laid centuries ago. My past trauma wasn't just a catalyst, it was the main course. And the architect of this entire, grotesque design wasn't just my ancestor, it was me by blood. I was tied to it, I was the key. What did it mean to be the chosen sacrifice? What did it mean to be consumed without dying? And how could I fight something that had been patiently waiting for me for generations to walk right into its maw? The journal page lay open, the ink a faded scrawl, but the words were burned into my mind. Architect of their demise. Not the fire, not the immediate cause, but the structure itself. My design. The very bones of the house I'd poured my heart into, the one that had taken everything from me. It wasn't just a house, it was a trap. A cage for something hungry, and I, unknowingly, had helped build its walls. My stomach clenched, a cold, hard knot that radiated through my chest. Guilt was a familiar companion, but this was different. This was complicity. I pushed away from the dusty desk, the chair scraping against the floorboards. The air in the study felt thick, heavy with unspoken histories, with secrets that had festered in these rooms for generations. My hands trembled, but it wasn't fear, not entirely. It was a cold, simmering rage. I had been a victim, yes, broken and lost. But if this house, this entity, had taken everything because of something I'd done, something my family had done, then I would tear it apart, stone by stone, until I understood, until I found a way to fight back. My gaze swept around the study, a room overflowing with forgotten relics. This wasn't just a place to live. It was a vault of ancestral secrets. I needed blueprints, journals, anything that detailed the original construction, any modifications, any family lore that seemed out of place. Architects, even those in my family, were meticulous. There had to be something. I started with the shelves, running my fingers over the spines of ancient tomes, their leather cracked and brittle. My fingers brushed against a loose panel behind a particularly heavy volume on structural engineering. My breath hitched. It wasn't a hidden passage, just a small, almost imperceptible cavity. Inside, nestled amongst cobwebs and dust, I found a roll of aged parchment, tied with a decaying silk ribbon. My heart hammered against my ribs as I carefully unrolled it on the desk. It was a set of blueprints, hand-drawn, dated almost 2 centuries ago. The lines were precise, the annotations in a looping script I recognized from the earlier journal entries. This wasn't just a blueprint. It was the original blueprint for the ancestral home. My home. I traced the familiar layout of the house, the grand hall, the sprawling wings. But then my finger paused. There, beneath the cellar, a section I'd never seen before. Not a foundation, not a crawl space. A carefully delineated, empty space labeled simply, the chamber. And leading into it, a series of narrow, almost invisible conduits snaking through the very walls of the house, culminating in each room. My eyes darted to the annotations. Latin phrases, alongside strange symbols meticulously drawn. One phrase stood out, repeated multiple times next to the conduits. Sanguinem et dolorum, vidi essentia. Blood and sorrow, essence of life. My mind reeled. The conduits weren't for ventilation or plumbing. They were veins. The house wasn't just a structure. It was a living, breathing thing designed to channel something, to feed something. And the chamber below the cellar, a space I never knew existed, was its stomach, its heart. The air grew heavy, the scent of damp earth and something acrid, like old iron, filled my nostrils. I heard a faint, dragging sound from the floor above, a soft thump, thump, thump that resonated through the floorboards. It wasn't loud, but it was deliberate, slow, approaching. My breath caught. I wasn't alone, not really. The entity knew I was digging. I clutched the blueprint, my grip tight. This wasn't a game. This was a battle for my very soul and for the souls of those it had already consumed. I had to understand the symbols, the Latin. I had to find out what the chamber truly was and what it held. The dragging sound stopped directly above me. I imagined it, whatever it was, standing just above, listening, waiting. My skin prickled. I had to get out. Not run, not hide, but to think, to breathe, away from the suffocating presence that now felt like a physical weight on my shoulders. I shoved the blueprint into my bag, grabbing a heavy, leather-bound book on ancient architecture that had been near the hidden panel. Perhaps it contained some of the answers to the strange symbols. I needed fresh air. I needed distance. I moved silently through the house, each creak of the floorboards amplifying the tension. I pushed open the heavy oak door leading outside, desperate for the cool night air. Instead, I was met by a wall of white. Thick, impenetrable fog had rolled in, blanketing everything. The world beyond the house was swallowed, reduced to a few feet of visibility. The fog swirled around my ankles, then rose to my waist, obscuring the ground. I walked, driven by an instinct to distance myself from the house, even if only by a few yards. The fog muted everything, stealing the shape of the trees, blurring the edges of the distant outbuildings. I could barely see my hand in front of my face. And then through the swirling white, a vague outline emerged. A low, crumbling wall, and beyond it, the faint impression of an open space. The recreation yard in thick fog, the watchtower invisible. I could feel the dampness clinging to my clothes, seeping into my hair. The air tasted metallic like rain on rusted iron. I stepped into the yard, the ground beneath my feet turning to damp, sparse grass. The fog here was even thicker, a living, breathing shroud. I could feel the presence of the invisible watchtower, a hulking, unseen monument looming somewhere beyond the white veil. What had it watched? What had it seen? A low moan, almost a sigh, drifted from the direction of the invisible tower. It was faint, barely audible above the ringing in my ears, but it was there. It wasn't human. It was something ancient, something sorrowful, something hungry. The sound seemed to resonate from within the very fog itself, pressing in on me, suffocating. I gripped the strap of my bag, my grip tight. This place wasn't just designed to contain. It was designed to feed. And now, I was standing in its feeding ground, exposed, vulnerable. What had been harvested here, and was I next? The words from the journal were a brand searing into my mind. My design, it wasn't just a mistake, it was a weapon. I had built the cage, secured the lock. The guilt, a familiar weight, now had a sharpened edge, twisting in my gut. My vision blurred for a moment, the faded ink seeming to swim on the page. How could I have been so blind, so utterly, catastrophically blind? A low thrum vibrated through the floorboards, a resonance I'd felt before, a pull. It wasn't a sound so much as a pressure, a deep hum against my teeth. The house wanted something from me. It had wanted me to find that journal, to read those words. And now it wanted me to go, somewhere else. The air grew colder even in the stuffy study, and a faint, sweet smell like bruised lilies and damp earth drifted past my nose. It was the scent of the entity, I knew it. A lure. I stood, the journal still clutched in my hand, its pages brittle. The house groaned around me, an old beast stretching. My determination, born of despair and a desperate need for answers, hardened. If my design was the problem, then I needed to understand its full scope. I needed to see what else it had touched, what other suffering it had orchestrated. The hum intensified, pulling me away from the study, down the creaking staircase. Each step was an effort, like walking through thick water. The scent of lilies grew stronger, almost cloying. It led me through the echoing halls, past portraits whose eyes seemed to follow my every move, their painted expressions shifting from sorrow to something resembling hunger. The front door, usually heavy and resistant, swung open with an eerie ease, revealing a world swallowed by a dense, unmoving fog. The air outside was raw, biting at my exposed skin. It tasted of damp earth and something metallic, like old blood. The fog was a living thing, swirling and coiling, reducing the world to shades of gray and obscuring everything beyond a few feet. I could barely see the overgrown path leading from the house. Yet the invisible pull persisted, drawing me forward, deeper into the shroud. My breath plumed out in white clouds, instantly lost in the mist. I shivered, not just from the cold, but from the unnerving silence that the fog imposed, muffling all sound. I walked, guided by instinct and that persistent internal thrum. The ground beneath my worn boots shifted from flagstone to cracked asphalt, then to compacted dirt, uneven and littered with pebbles. I knew this path, a place for what? I'd never asked, never wanted to know, but now the house compelled me. The fog grew thicker, a suffocating blanket. My outstretched hand disappeared into it, swallowed whole. I could feel the open expanse of the recreation yard in thick fog, watchtower invisible though I couldn't see its boundaries. The watchtower, a skeletal silhouette on clearer days, was now erased, its ominous presence only a memory in my mind. The air pressed against my eardrums, creating a dull ache. Then a sound, a low, guttural cough not far. I stopped dead, every muscle tensing. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. I held my breath, listening, straining to pierce the milky veil of the fog. Another cough, closer this time, followed by a shuffling scrape, like feet dragging through loose gravel. It was a man, gaunt and stooped, his clothes ragged and hanging from his frame. His face, when he finally turned towards me, was a roadmap of suffering, etched with lines of despair and a vacant, unsettling gaze. His eyes, sunken and ringed with purple, fixed on me with an intensity that belied his otherwise broken appearance. He didn't seem surprised to see me. It was as if he had been expecting me. "What is this place?" I managed, my voice hoarse. "This is where the grief takes root, where it blossoms." He took a shuffling step closer, and I instinctively recoiled. The smell of damp earth and lilies clung to him, stronger than before. The architect. I built the vessel, I gave it form. He pointed a bony finger at me, his hand trembling. "But it shapes I too. It weaves. It plants the seeds of discord, of despair. It pushes, just a little, a misplaced beam, a faulty wire, a forgotten argument. It nurtures the guilt, the regret until it's ripe. And then..." He made a tearing motion with his hands, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "Then it consumes." My mind reeled. Architect of their demise. It wasn't just my fault. It was orchestrated. The entity didn't just capitalize on tragedy, it created it, subtly influencing those susceptible to its insidious suggestions. It had whispered to me, perhaps, during the design phase, planting the fatal flaw. It had whispered to others, guiding them to their own destruction or to become instruments of another's. The caretaker was one such instrument, I realized, a broken puppet. "It showed me," he continued, his voice rising in a frantic crescendo, "the others, the ones before I, the architects of this place, of the manor, of the other places." His gaze flickered around the unseen expanse of the yard as if seeing ghosts in the fog. They built their guilt into the very stones. Each brick, each beam, a testament to its influence, and their despair was the feast. He lunged, not at me but past me into the fog, his arms outstretched as if grasping at something unseen. "It's always hungry, always." His movements were jerky, unnatural, like strings were being pulled. Was he trying to grab the entity itself, or was he merely thrashing against its invisible hold? And I, Raj, had been just another ingredient. The caretaker turned back to me, his eyes burning with an almost manic glee, no longer vacant. "And now it's your turn to build its next great hunger." He began to laugh, a dry, hacking sound that echoed eerily in the fog. "What will I design for it next, architect? What new tragedy will I craft?" He took another step towards me, his hands now reaching out, fingers splayed as if to grasp my face. I could see the raw, red skin beneath his fingernails, torn from frantic scratching. Was he trying to mark me, to make me like him? What other horrors had this entity compelled him to do? The air still hummed with the ghost of the previous encounter, a phantom chill that clung to my skin, even as a fresh surge of resolve hardened my jaw. The way the thing had reached for me, the raw, red skin under its fingernails, it wasn't just a specter. It was something tangible, something that could inflict pain or, worse, change me. But the fear for once didn't paralyze me. It ignited a cold, steady anger. I wouldn't let it win. I wouldn't let it consume me like it had consumed so many others, like it had tried to consume my family. I found the passage behind a shifting wall panel in the study, where the architect's notes had hinted at a hidden foundation chamber. Not a basement in the traditional sense, but something deeper, something integral to the house's very bones. The panel slid with a groan of ancient wood and rusted runners, revealing a narrow, spiraling staircase carved from rough, unpolished stone. No light penetrated its depths. The air grew thick, damp, carrying the scent of wet earth and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old, dried blood. The walls pressed in, the rough-hewn stone scraping my shoulders in the tight turns. My breath plumed in the frigid air, each exhalation a fragile cloud in the encroaching gloom. The silence was absolute, save for the crunch of my boots on grit-covered steps and the frantic beat of my own heart against my ribs. I kept my gaze fixed on the lantern's trembling beam, willing it to pierce the blackness, to show me what waited below. The stairs seemed endless, spiraling deeper and deeper, long past where a normal foundation should end. The house above me felt like a distant memory, a fragile shell. This was the true core, the twisted root. Then the stone gave way to an earthen tunnel, rough-hewn and smelling powerfully of decay. The air here was even heavier, pressing against my eardrums. The metallic sweetness intensified, laced with something acrid like burnt offerings. The tunnel sloped gently downwards, the floor uneven and slick. I could feel a faint vibration beneath my feet, a low thrum that seemed to resonate from the very earth itself. They was the house breathing. The tunnel opened into a vast, cavernous space. My lantern, even at its brightest, struggled to illuminate the edges of the chamber. From the ceiling, thick, gnarled roots, black as pitch, hung down like the matted hair of some ancient, buried beast. They pulsed faintly, almost imperceptibly, with the same low thrum I'd felt underfoot. And then I saw it or felt it. The space shifted. The metallic scent turned sickeningly sweet, cloying like a funeral wreath left too long in the sun. The cavern dissolved. I was standing in an open space, vast and undefined, swathed in an impossibly thick, churning fog. The ground beneath me was no longer slick earth but cracked asphalt, littered with loose pebbles and the occasional withered weed pushing through the fissures. There was a faint, cloying dampness on my skin and the taste of ash on my tongue. This was it. The entity hadn't just led me here, it had made this place. It had manifested my deepest anxieties, my guilt over confinement, over the fire that had trapped my family. The watchtower, which I knew must be there, was swallowed whole by the swirling whiteout, an unseen eye that still felt like it was scrutinizing every inch of me. They were just beyond hearing, just out of reach, but their presence was undeniable. I remembered the architect's notes, the cryptic warnings about the entity that feeds on sorrow, that makes a prison of the mind. This wasn't just a physical place, it was a psychological trap, designed to drown me in the very emotions I sought to escape. The entity didn't just consume grief, it cultivated it, harvested it, turning pain into sustenance. My family's suffering, my own crushing guilt, it was all food for this thing, a flicker in the fog. It was too quick to be real, too indistinct to confirm. But it left behind a lingering scent, not the metallic sweetness, but something else, something familiar. The faint, sweet smell of burnt sugar, a smell I hadn't consciously registered since that night, the night the fire took everything. It was the scent of my daughter's favorite dessert, baked just hours before the flames. The entity wasn't just mimicking. It was twisting my memories, using them as bait. It was showing me the consequence of my architectural failures, the very place where my family's innocence had been consumed. I heard a child's sob, a woman's desperate gasp. My hands clenched into fists, fingernails digging into my palms. I wouldn't break. I couldn't. This wasn't real, not in the way the house was real. This was a projection, a performance staged for my torment. I had come here to confront it, and I wouldn't be swayed by its illusions, no matter how potent, how agonizingly specific. The architect's final, almost illegible scrawl echoed in my mind. To defeat it, I must starve it, deny it my sorrow, offer it only resolve. But how do you starve a hunger that feeds on the very essence of your being? What weapon could stand against a foe that manipulated memory and emotion? There was my resolve truly enough to overcome something so ancient, so utterly parasitic. Raj's hands, calloused from years of drafting and building, trembled slightly, but the tremor wasn't from fear. It was from the sheer, focused intensity of his purpose. The questions from the previous night had solidified into a single, terrifying answer. I had to starve it, not with absence but with presence. Not by running, but by facing the architect of my own undoing. My mind, usually cluttered with blueprints and structural loads, was now a single, sharpened point aimed at the heart of this house, at the essence of the thing that consumed grief. I moved through the echoing halls, not as a victim, but as a surveyor mapping an enemy's stronghold. Every creak, every groan of the ancient timber was a tell, every cold spot, a vein of its influence. I saw the house differently now, not just as walls and floors, but as a conduit, a carefully constructed trap. The entity wasn't just in the house. It was the house, or at least, a parasitic growth that had fused with its very foundations, twisting its original purpose. This was my revelation, a chilling clarity that had struck me during a sleepless dawn, poring over my family's old journals and the original plans for the estate. The house was designed as a sanctuary, a place of healing, but generations of sorrow, unacknowledged and unreleased, had warped that intent, creating a perfect feeding ground. The entity didn't just consume grief, it amplified it, a perpetual motion machine of despair. My strategy was born from this understanding. I couldn't destroy it, not without destroying the house and with it, the last tangible link to my family. I had to re-engineer it. I had to restore the house's original blueprint of peace, to deny the entity the corrupted resonance it needed to thrive. It was an act of architectural exorcism, a silent war waged with intent and understanding. I started in the deepest part of the cellar, a place of damp earth and forgotten things, where the house's roots truly lay. I carried no tools, only a concentrated will, an architect's eye for flow and structure. I closed my eyes, reaching out with my senses, feeling the subtle vibrations in the stone, the hum of sorrow that resonated through the very earth. "You built it, Raj," my father's voice, a ghost of a sound, scraped against my ears. "You left us to burn." My breath hitched. My hands clenched, nails digging into my palms. This was its counterattack, its desperate attempt to feed, to break my resolve with the very guilt I was trying to overcome. I pushed back, focusing on the unseen lines of the house, the invisible currents of its original design. I pictured the flow of positive energy, the intent of sanctuary like an electrical current trying to reroute it to sever the parasitic connections. The house shuddered. Not a physical tremor, but a deep internal vibration that resonated in my bones. Dust rained from the ceiling. A sudden, jarring shift, and the cellar around me seemed to expand, the walls receding into an endless gray expanse. I was no longer in the damp stone cellar, but standing in a vast, open space. It was a recreation yard in thick fog, watchtower invisible. The ground beneath my feet was cracked asphalt, slick with moisture. The air was heavy, tasting of ozone and despair. This was a place of trapped souls, of endless, monotonous suffering, a vision it was forcing upon me, trying to drown me in collective despair. A child's whimper, thin and lost, drifted from the fog, then another and another, a chorus of tiny, broken sounds pulling at the frayed edges of my sanity. My family, they were here somewhere in this gray purgatory. I could feel them. My wife's soft touch, my daughter's laughter, they were twisted, distorted into echoes of pain. "They're gone, Raj," a voice, insidious and formless, hissed from the swirling mist. "Because of you, you trapped them, just like this." My chest tightened, my lungs burned. It wanted me to succumb, to become another echo in its endless consumption. But I was an architect. I saw structure even in this illusion. The fog, the watchtower, they were constructs of its will, designed to break my will. They had a blueprint, a purpose, and I could dismantle it. I closed my eyes again, forcing the image of the cellar back into my mind, the true lines of the ancestral home. I pictured the stone walls, the sturdy foundations, the protective roof. I focused on the original purpose, sanctuary. I began to mentally reroute the energy like diverting a river. I imagined solidifying the walls, not just of the house, but of my own mind, creating a barrier against its projections. I saw the sorrowful currents that fed the entity, and I started to dry them up, brick by invisible brick, intention by intention. A shriek, not of human origin, tore through the illusory fog, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage and pain. The recreation yard wavered, the child whimpers dissolving into static. The asphalt cracked and vanished, replaced by the damp earth of the cellar floor. I stumbled, opening my eyes, gasping for air. I was back. I had found its weakness, its reliance on distortion. It couldn't create, it could only twist. If I restored the true form, the true purpose, I starved it. I moved with renewed urgency, ascending the stairs, touching every wall, every doorframe, every window, imbuing them with my intent. I visualized the house as a living organism, flushing out a toxin. I sealed off the places where the grief had pooled thickest, not with physical barriers, but with a mental repurposing, transforming them from wells of despair into chambers of quiet. The entity fought back with increasing ferocity. The house itself became a chaotic symphony of fear. Doors slammed shut, furniture toppled with unseen force. A chandelier in the main hall crashed to the floor, spraying crystal shards. Its presence was everywhere, a malevolent storm lashing out, but it felt desperate. The air up here was thin, crackling with static energy, but I held firm. This was its last stand, its final, most potent illusion. I closed my eyes, ignoring the phantom hands that seemed to claw at my clothes, the icy breath on my neck. I pictured the house's original roof, a protective canopy, not a gateway to despair. I was an architect. I could rebuild. I could restore. I pushed with every fiber of my being against the entity's presence. I felt a tremendous resistance, like pushing against an invisible solid wall of pure malevolence. The house groaned, a sound like tearing metal. A sudden, violent gust of wind ripped through the attic, though all windows were shut. I opened my eyes. The attic was still dusty, still old, but the air felt clean, purified. The house was quiet. Had I done it? Had I truly managed to sever its connection, to re-architect its prison? The silence was absolute, almost unnerving in its completeness. What if it had simply retreated, biding its time, waiting for the house to once again fill with the grief it craved? I closed my eyes, the phantom hands on my clothes, the icy breath on my neck, all a desperate illusion. The house was a protective canopy, not a gateway. I focused on the wood, the beams, the solid weight of it above me, above them. My family. I wouldn't let it twist their memory. The screams intensified, a chorus of familiar voices, each one tearing at a different piece of my resolve. Coward, killer, failure. They were words that had been carved into me, but they weren't their words. They were its words. I pushed back, not with strength, but with a sudden, fierce clarity. This wasn't real. It had never been real, not the way it presented itself. It fed on the rot, on the guilt, on the grief. But grief, I realized, was also love, and love was stronger. It was a shield, a foundation. I pictured the original blueprints, the precise angles, the sturdy joists. I focused on the structure, the integrity, not the fire, not the collapse, the design, the intention. A guttural shriek tore through the air, shaking the very foundations of the house. This wasn't a phantom sound. This was real. The clawing intensified, physical now, tearing at my shirt, drawing blood. A searing cold plunged into my chest, a desperate final attempt to anchor itself. I gasped, vision blurring, but I held onto the image of the roof, whole, unbreached. My family safe beneath it. Then silence. I opened my eyes. The room was a ruin. Plaster dust hung thick in the air, catching the weak gray light filtering through a shattered window pane. The ornate wallpaper, once peeling, now hung in ragged strips, revealing damp, skeletal lath beneath. A section of the ceiling had collapsed, exposing blackened beams and a gaping hole to the floor above. The entity was gone, or at least it was no longer here. I lay amidst debris, shards of glass glinting like frozen tears. My body screamed. Every muscle ached, every joint protested. My shirt was torn, a shallow gash bleeding sluggishly on my arm. I pushed myself up slowly, each movement a laborious effort. The house groaned around me, a new kind of sound, not malevolent but weary, wounded. It had fought too. It had been scarred. I stumbled through the wrecked corridors, the dust muffling my footsteps. The grand staircase was a splintered mess, its elegant banister snapped like a twig. Doors hung askew, frames twisted. My design, my legacy, now a testament to a different kind of destruction. I had survived, but the house, my anchor, was irrevocably broken. A sudden, sharp clang echoed from downstairs. I froze, every nerve alert. Was it truly gone, or was this a trick? I listened, my breathing shallow, my heart thrumming against my ribs. Another clang, closer this time, followed by the shuffle of heavy boots. Something solid, human. I crept towards the source of the noise, my hand gripping a splintered piece of wood, a pathetic weapon. Rounding the corner into what used to be the main hall, I saw a figure standing amidst the rubble. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the gaping hole where the front door used to be, now just a jagged outline against the gray morning light. His head was shaved close, and a thick scar ran from his temple to his jawline. He was a stranger, no surprise, no alarm, just a steady, assessing gaze. "Ira awake," he rumbled, his voice rough like gravel. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask what happened. He simply nodded towards the ruined doorway. Time to go. My mind raced. Who was he? How did he get in? And where was go? I wanted to ask, but the words caught in my throat. My legs felt like lead. He didn't wait for an answer. He simply turned and walked out through the shattered frame into the pale light. Then reluctantly I followed. It clung to everything, muffling sounds, blurring shapes. I blinked, trying to make sense of my surroundings. The house, what was left of it, receded behind me, swallowed by the swirling gray. The stranger walked ahead, his silhouette a vague smudge in the murk. I stumbled after him, my steps uneven on what felt like uneven gravel. I could taste the damp earth, smell something metallic and faintly industrial like old oil. The ground changed beneath my feet from gravel to cracked asphalt, then to something softer like packed dirt. The air grew heavier, denser with moisture. Then through a sudden, momentary thinning of the fog, I saw it. A vast, open expanse, enclosed by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Empty, desolate, patches of sickly green grass pushed through cracks in the asphalt. A single rusted basketball hoop stood crookedly in the distance, its net long gone. This was it. The watchtower I knew was there. The stranger stopped, turning to face me. He pointed vaguely into the swirling white. "Someone will be with I." Then he turned and vanished into the fog, leaving me utterly alone. I stared into the impenetrable wall of white, my breath pluming before me. What kind of recreation yard was this? And who was someone? And why was I here? The fog was a living thing, a suffocating shroud that tasted of damp earth and something metallic, a faint tang that scraped at the back of my throat. I stood in the recreation yard, the phrase itself an absurd mockery, the watchtower invisible, swallowed whole by the oppressive white. The colleague had melted away, leaving only the memory of his empty eyes and that unsettling, knowing smile. My breath plumed before me, each exhalation a fragile cloud in the vast, cold silence. The only sound was the drip of unseen moisture from branches I couldn't perceive and that faint, distant hum, a low thrum that vibrated in the soles of my boots, deep in the earth beneath me. What kind of recreation, I'd wondered. I could feel the tremor in my knees, not from fear, not entirely, but from the sheer exhaustion of having carried so much for so long. The hum intensified subtly, a change in pitch so slight it might have been my own pulse roaring in my ears. This place, this yard, it was a stage. The fire, my family. The blueprints I'd drawn, meticulous lines on paper that had become a trap. Guilt, a persistent splinter in my soul, had festered for years, providing a rich, constant offering. The entity didn't just exist in the house. It was the house, its very bones steeped in the sorrow of my lineage. My ancestors hadn't merely lived here. They had cultivated a grotesque garden of despair, unknowingly feeding the thing that now sought to consume me. They were echoes, preserved grief, the entity's way of keeping its larder stocked, its essence nourished. It wasn't just the fog, it was the house reaching out, testing me, probing for a weakness. I closed my eyes, picturing the intricate network of pipes and vents, the hidden passages, the very flow of air through the structure I had so intimately known. I had designed my own prison, my own gallows. My family had built theirs, generations ago, brick by brick, sorrow by sorrow. The entity was not some external demon that possessed the walls. It was the house's consciousness, born from the very foundation of despair, growing stronger with each tragedy it witnessed, each life it claimed, each heart it broke. They had engineered a living trap. The hum grew louder, a deep, resonant chord that seemed to emanate from the ground itself, vibrating up through my teeth. It felt like the house was clearing its throat, preparing to speak, to offer its final, tempting illusion. I opened my eyes. The fog remained impenetrable, but I could feel the weight of unseen presences pressing in. The colleague, the others who had come before me, The ones who were meant to recreate their trauma here. They weren't just victims. They were participants, unknowingly or not, in this elaborate, cruel ritual. My knuckles ached, my jaw was tight. I had spent so long running from the truth, from the guilt that defined me. But standing here in this desolate yard, the truth was a bitter pill I finally swallowed whole. I was the last architect, the last link in a chain of grief. I could not simply walk away. The entity would find another family, another architect, another source of sorrow. It would continue its endless feast. The hum pulsed, and for a fleeting moment I felt a familiar pang of despair, a phantom echo of the fire's heat, the screams. But I pushed it back, a deliberate, conscious effort. It was a reflex, an old wound the entity tried to pry open. But the wound was healing. Not gone, perhaps never truly gone, but no longer a gaping maw for it to feed upon. I had come to this house seeking solace, a fresh start. I found a horror that mirrored my own internal landscape. But now I saw a path. I couldn't destroy the house without becoming its ultimate offering, another blazing tragedy for it to consume. I couldn't rebuild it, but I could starve it. I could deny it. My purpose wasn't to escape. It was to sever the supply line, to cut off the very grief and guilt that gave it life. This house was a monument to suffering, and I was its reluctant, determined guardian. My breath plumed again, a steady, rhythmic cloud. The hum continued, a low, guttural murmur, but it no longer felt like a threat. It felt like a lament. I took a step, then another, moving through the fog, away from the vague direction the colleague had vanished. I didn't know how I would do it, how I would dismantle a horror woven into the very fabric of existence. But I knew I wouldn't leave. As I walked, the hum began to recede, or perhaps I was simply moving beyond its immediate sphere of influence. The fog remained dense and blinding, but now it felt less like a prison and more like a veil, hiding what lay ahead, what new challenges would emerge from the white. Could a house truly be starved of its essence, or would it simply wait, patient and hungry, for the next offering?